Everybody, this video is for the lesson for Wednesday, April 26th. Just to review, our objective is the same that we've had for the last week on photosynthesis. Number one, I will construct a scientific explanation based on evidence that radiant energy from the sun is converted into chemical energy through photosynthesis. And number two, I will relate the law of conservation of mass to the photosynthesis equation. So I'm out of the building today. I want you to watch the lesson for Wednesday, April 26th. It's the video inside this folder. And then you're going to follow the instructions in the video to fill out your photosynthesis student notes. There's a digital copy in this folder, or if you want a hard copy, you should be able to ask my sub for that. Whatever you are unable to finish in class is due Thursday, so please make sure that you get all of your notes completed. All right, let me show you what's inside here. Inside the folder, you have this very first PDF. It's the photosynthesis student notes. If you want a digital copy, go ahead and put this in GoodNotes. And I'm just going to go through it really, really fast with you. You'll notice that I have a heading that's bolded and underlined. That's going to be for each slide. Okay. And then on each slide, I have a bolded word that's going to fit right inside here in this slot. These are just skeleton notes that you guys are going to fill out. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, I went ahead and I read your essential questions. It's our objectives for today. This is the last day of notes, the last day of anything for photosynthesis. We're going to move on to a new topic on Thursday. And so please make sure that you are able to answer these two essential questions by the time you're finished with the notes today. All right, we're going to start off with the sun's radiant energy. So on your notes, just find that on page 1. And you'll notice on the on the right side, I'm going to have pictures or different graphics that I'm showing you just to sort of illustrate what we've been talking about. So when we talk about the sun's radiant energy, it is a form of kinetic energy, and it travels by waves or particles, and it's what makes life on Earth possible. So as you're filling out these words, let me talk real quickly. The other day we talked about the electromagnetic spectrum, and that's where there's all these different waves that we get from the sun, and the only one that's visible to us is what we call the visible light spectrum, and those are the different colors that we see. So the sun's radiant energy falls under which part of the electromagnetic spectrum? It would be the visible light part. The waves, the sun's radiant energy moves through space, and we can't see those waves as far as anything outside of that visible spectrum. The sun's radiant energy can be absorbed, it can be transmitted, and it can be reflected. Visible light energy is vital for plants to make their own food. Without it, there is no photosynthesis. There's no way for plants to make their own food. As I'm moving through this, if I'm going too fast for you, just please pause your video, make sure that you get everything filled in, and then we'll move on. All right, so the next section is titled, Why Are Plants Green? I want you to think about this. As you're looking at that picture, what color is reflected back to cause plants to appear green? Some of you guys know this information already. At the very top in that graphic, we see that all the colors in the visible light spectrum come down from the sun, and it looks like they are repelled or reflected back. And that's why we see white. So white light is reflected when all of the colors are reflected. Now black, the color black, is when all of the colors are absorbed. There is no reflection. When we see individual colors, it's because that color light is reflected back, and that's what we see. So that green And the word photosynthesis on the screen is green because the green color is reflected back, and that's what we see. All the other colors are absorbed. The black, why are plants green? That's black because all of the colors were absorbed. There is no color. The white that you see here is white because all of the colors are being reflected back. I think that is absolutely fascinating. What our eyes do, how complex our eyes are, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing what we see. So, of course, the reason why we see the color green in a leaf for a plant is because the green color is reflected back. And in the picture there, you'll see that there's little red flowers on this plant. And of course, we see that they're red because the red light is reflected back. All other colors are absorbed. So the plant cells have chloroplasts, which contain the pigment chlorophyll. And if you'll remember, chlorophyll absorbs most of the colors of the visible light spectrum except green, which is reflected. And then we just remind you again about that. Red is being reflected from the flower, and the green is reflected from the leaf. All right, the next section is two reactants. So I want you to ask yourself, why does photosynthesis only occur during daylight hours? Well, hopefully you went into your kind of remember, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Hopefully you're remembering that one of the stipulations is that we need energy from the sun. But the energy from the sun is not one of the reactants. We have two reactants. Number one, water, which is absorbed from the soil. And the second one is carbon dioxide or CO2. And that's brought in from the air. So let's talk about those a little bit more. So the food making process is called photosynthesis. And this only occurs during the daylight hours. Let's investigate further into how this process works. This is all hopefully a review for you guys, but if there's anything that needs clarification, this is where it's going to take place. The third requirement for photosynthesis is, of course, energy from the sun, but remember, this is not one of the reactants. All right, so let's talk about light energy first. There's no way that you can match this, so we're just going to talk about it. There's an organelle there, and then there's something inside the organelle. The sun or the light from another source hits the leaves. If you guys look in my room, you'll notice that I have a plant stand, and on that plant stand, I have ultraviolet lights. That is a artificial light source that allows the plants in my classroom to undergo photosynthesis because there are no windows in my classroom. Some of you may have noticed, like on Fridays, I put all my plants on my rolling table and I roll them down the hallway and I leave them overnight or over the whole weekend so that they get some natural light. That's best for them. They're not awesome. They just don't grow as well with artificial light, but they certainly will go through photosynthesis. So the pigment chlorophyll, it's found in the chloroplast, allows the plant to absorb the light energy. And of course, the chlorophyll is A. That's what's inside of the chloroplast. Chloroplast would be B. And it only occurs in green plants, which makes sense because if you guys remember, the prefix chloral means green. So water and nutrients are necessary for plant growth, but water itself is necessary for photosynthesis. There are two types of transport tissues that are responsible for carrying water and nutrients to the plant. The xylem transports water from the roots to the leaves, and the phloem transports glucose from the leaves to the rest of the plant. And of course, these are found in vascular plants only. Plants that don't have vascular organelles don't have these. Examples would be like mosses. They don't have the xylem and the phloem. Okay, so I want you to think about something. What characteristics of a leaf make it a good tool for photosynthesis? And you don't have to actually do this. I just wanted to talk about it. The fact that a leaf is so broad, there's a lot of surface area there, that's a really good characteristic because it allows for more of the pores or those openings, the stomata, to be present there. Also, if you can look on there, the vascular leaves on the right, they're perfectly made for those the xylem and the phloem. They look like veins that go through the leaf. So it's perfect. Also, characteristic of a leaf is that they are very plentiful. So if you look at the tree on the right, or I'm sorry, on the left side, and imagine how many different pores are on each leaf and then how many leaves there are, it's amazing. All right, so let's talk about the second requirement in the reactant, that's carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide enters the leaf through small openings called the stoma. A stoma is singular, the plural would be stomata, and the picture is there on the right. The stoma opening is just that one opening, and then on the right side, that's that stoma that's closed. On either side of the stoma are guard cells, which control the opening and closing of the stoma. Green plants remove a ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, so they require it. They take that out of the atmosphere and use that for photosynthesis. Okay, at the bottom of your page, you have this review, and I just want you guys to think about this for a second. Across the top, I want you to think about what are the things that are required for photosynthesis. So what are the energy source, or what is the energy source, and what are the reactants? And then I want you to think about what structure is needed in order for that to be used in photosynthesis. So if we think about the energy source, we've got radiant energy from the sun. So what structure in the leaf is required to take advantage of the radiant energy from the sun in order to go through the photosynthesis process? Well, there's actually two structures. We need the chloroplasts and we need the chlorophyll. All right, what are the reactants? First one is carbon dioxide. And I want you to go ahead and write out carbon dioxide and CO2 only just as a way for you to review. Carbon dioxide is, the formula is CO, and then make your 2 smaller than the O, the capital O. It needs to be smaller. Don't forget also to capitalize. So the structures needed in the plant, in order to get carbon dioxide into the leaf, we need the guard cells and we need the stomata. Notice that I have the plural stomata because I have plural guard cells, indicating many, many guard cells. So we're going to have the plural stomata. And then lastly, I've got carbon dioxide. I need water. Now, what structure is needed to bring the water into the plant? That's the xylem. All right. So let's talk about this equation for photosynthesis. The ingredients for making food in a green plant can be written in a chemical equation. The first part of the photosynthesis equation is written below, and these ingredients are called the reactants because they cause a chemical reaction. So I want you guys to write the chemical equation for photosynthesis. We're just going to really focus on the first part here. I used that orange for reactants, and I used the orange to highlight the reactant part of the equation. It's what's on the left side of the arrow, and I'm going to have you make sure that you write it so that it is balanced, and we'll talk about that in a couple slides. But I've got 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water. Those are my reactants. And of course, I need you to make sure that you have energy from the sun, above the yield sign because, again, it's not part of the reactant, but it's definitely necessary. We could not have photosynthesis without energy from the sun. And then we've got the two products made during photosynthesis, and that's the result of the chemical reaction. We've got glucose, which is energy for the plant, and oxygen, yay, just what we need. So that is written out below for you. Glucose, of course, is one molecule. It's C6H12O6 plus 6O2, 6 molecules of oxygen. And of course, the energy from the sun. Okay, so what are the products? First of all, we've got glucose. I put sugar in parentheses. I told you guys I really, really want you to identify it as glucose. It's okay that you know that it's sugar. Don't just say that it makes sugar. Don't say it makes carbohydrates. Really be sure that you can identify that photosynthesis is when plants make glucose. So this is transported around the plant as soluble sugar. The word soluble means that it's dissolved or able to be dissolved in water, which makes sense because a plant isn't going to be able to move grains of sugar around itself. It has to be dissolved in the water. Plants can turn glucose into starch for storage. So starch is another carbohydrate. It is a different molecule. It's a completely different, like that molecule you see up on the right-hand side, that's a glucose molecule. Starch is a different arrangement of those atoms. And the point is that it's something that the plant hangs on to as potential energy. It's energy that's stored. Imagine if you're a person, you have stored energy in the form of starch and fat. Well, plants don't have fat, so they have starch. Cell walls in plants are made of starches, which is interesting. So plants also use starches as a source of fuel. Okay, this last product then is oxygen. And so just a reminder, in the picture on the right, carbon dioxide goes in, oxygen comes out. I want to ask you, what do you think the word byproduct means? Because oxygen is a byproduct released during photosynthesis. So I want you to think for a second. What does byproduct mean? Well, a byproduct is simply just something that's made that the plant doesn't need. So it's released. It's like an extra product that's made. It's not necessary for the plant. That's good for us because we need oxygen. So the oxygen, the O2, I should have made that to a smaller number. The O2, oxygen, moves out of the plant again through those pores, the openings called the stomata. And the process of photosynthesis puts a ton of oxygen back into the atmosphere. Remember that slide where I said photosynthesis takes a ton of carbon dioxide out and puts oxygen back in. So, how do we answer that second objective? How does the law of conservation of mass relate back to photosynthesis? Well, let's talk about it for a second. I have a chemical equation on the right side there. It is not photosynthesis. But again, if you would count the number of atoms of each element on both sides of the equation, you could see that I have the same number of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens on the reactant side and on the product side. That means that that is a balanced equation. It relates to the conservation of mass, law of conservation of mass, because mass in an isolated system is neither created nor destroyed. An isolated system means that it is contained. We don't have anything that we are adding during the process of the chemical reaction, and all the atoms are contained in that system. So we're used to saying during a chemical reaction, atoms are neither created or destroyed. The law of conservation of mass says that the mass is not created or destroyed, and the mass of the product is equal to the mass of the reactants. That means the number of atoms on both sides of the arrow must be equal. So we talked a lot yesterday or on Monday, about balancing the photosynthesis equation. And so again, just remember, we have to keep those, the coefficient, the large number in front of the carbon dioxide, which is number 6, and the number 6 in front of the water. We have to keep those coefficients there in order for us to have the right number of carbons, oxygens, and hydrogens on the reactant side to match with the glucose and the 6 molecules of oxygen on the product side. So remember, no mass is created or destroyed during that chemical reaction. Okay, this last thing I'm going to tell you, I'm just throwing it out there. It is not a state standard, but I want you to kind of understand where photosynthesis, photosynthesis for a green plant is just part of the equation of chemical reactions. There's a process called cellular respiration. And the chemical equation for cellular respiration is interesting in that it is glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide and water. And so what happens is during photosynthesis, the green plant will make glucose, okay? But in order to break down that glucose, it needs energy. The energy is locked inside the glucose molecules. And so, in order to unlock that, the green plants have to do something called respire or cellular respiration. So, cellular respiration creates energy for everything that the plant needs to grow, to reproduce, and to do any other life processes. Unlike photosynthesis, cellular respiration happens both day and night. Let me show you this last slide here. That first chemical equation is photosynthesis. That's going across the top. That should look very familiar to you. 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water. I don't like that this picture had this plus sign in there. Please ignore that plus sign. We've got energy from the sun. That yields glucose, C6H12O6, and 6 molecules of oxygen. Now, look at the cellular respiration formula. This is very interesting. You've got glucose and oxygen that yield carbon dioxide and water. And this is a part of the product, energy. So they're very similar in that they have the same molecules. They're different because of where the molecules take place. And it's different because in cellular respiration, one of the products is actually energy. Energy is released. This is like a cycle. A green plant has to make glucose, and then it has to break glucose down through a chemical reaction to make carbon dioxide and water, and then to release that energy. It's like this. Here's the crazy thing. Green plants are not the only organism that uses cellular respiration to get energy. Every single living thing undergoes cellular respiration. The difference is green plants don't eat, so they have to undergo photosynthesis in order to get that glucose. But all other organisms eat something. We're consumers. We eat. So the food that we eat, we have to break that down and use the chemical energy from that organism that we break down. So if you had this morning, let's say you had granola and yogurt, one of my very favorite breakfasts. I like granola and yogurt and blueberries. I love it. So think about that. I eat all that food, right? And it's sitting there in my stomach. And my stomach, my digestive system goes in and starts to digest it. Well, where do I get the energy to do that? Where do I get the energy to sit? Where do I get the energy to move my spoon and to put that yogurt in my mouth and think and like while I'm eating, I'm daydreaming or I'm planning out my day or I'm thinking like where do you get the energy to breathe? That comes from food that I've eaten in the past and I'm breaking that down. We have to break all of that down. It's a super fascinating process called cellular respiration, something you guys are going to revisit in high school. But I just wanted to show you that it's part of a green plant's process. And it's just this reoccurring cycle of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. All right, so now I want you to check for understanding. I want you to think about both of these objectives. By now, you should be able to answer both of them. This is a great way for you to study for your test. Don't just sit there and go, yeah, I know that, but can you actually write it out as a short answer? How does radiant energy from the sun turn into chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis and green plants? Can you tell me the step-by-step process? Can you use the vocabulary words for photosynthesis? Try and do that. And then number 2, how does the law of conservation of mass relate to the process of photosynthesis? Again, a short answer. See if you can do that. Those are great ways for you to study. All right. For the rest of class today, I want you to review your vocabulary. You can go into the folder, I believe it was in April 13th, and play a Kahoot to remind yourself about food chains, food webs, and energy pyramids. Definitely take a look at these 2 objectives and try to write those out. We've got one more small chapter in this ecosystem unit, and then we're going to have our end of the unit test probably next Tuesday. All right, you guys, take care. I'll see you tomorrow.